Make sure I have the right sermon. Mark 1:12 through 13 talks about the beginning of Jesus' ministry, and here's how it began for him. The Spirit immediately drove Jesus out into the wilderness, and he was there in the wilderness 40 days, being tempted by Satan. He was with wild animals, and the angels were ministering to him. So it wasn't all that different from church today, huh? The events of the Bible took place in the Middle East, so it makes sense that many of the most important things happened out in the wilderness or in the desert. The terms are really used interchangeably in the Bible. When I think of wilderness, I think of the Rocky Mountains, and Californians might think of Yosemite, but it means something different. It really means the desert in that area of the world. From the children of Israel who wandered in the desert for 40 years, to Jesus spending time being tempted in the wilderness for 40 days and nights, the image of the people of God wandering around in a place that is not meant to be their permanent dwelling, but is instead seen as a kind of preparation for what will be permanent. The stories of our faith have this definite pattern. Before the promised homeland could be established, a wandering through a temporary land had to happen. And before the establishment of the means of salvation through Christ's life, his teachings, his death, and his resurrection, he also wandered out in that temporary setting, preparing for what would become permanent. In our morning devotionals at home this week, I was reminded of these things, and the author of that morning devotional went on to make the following points, which I'm happy to share with you. And Marjorie, if she's still here again, thank you, darling. She gave us the book, and it's been our best morning devotional ever. You have a Methodist and a Presbyterian, and it's a book we agree on. So our lives themselves have about them the quality of wandering in the wilderness. We are creatures who long for permanence, to finally be established and settle down and be who and what we are. We want to arrive at that permanence and then spend our life there. But the truth of life is there is no permanence, and none of us ever arrive at that place, at least in our lives on earth. Think about that. It's easy to understand what is being said. All you have to do is think to when you were in preschool or preschool age. At that age, you thought you would finally arrive when you finally were allowed to go to kindergarten or perhaps first grade. Everyone was preparing you for it so that when you finally went to the big kid school, it seemed like you had arrived, that you'd made it. And there you were, a big kid at last. But you find out quickly that being a big kid in first grade is not it. You have to move on with your life. And we carry that routine all of our life, thinking that each major milestone will somehow be the final thing when we have become what we have been preparing to be. We hope that at some point in our life we will arrive and be the full us, but it never happens. From grade school to high school to college to marriage to having a family to being an empty nester, you never arrive at a permanent place or state in your life. Even today, as you sit here, you are the result of everything that has ever happened in your life, but you aren't anywhere near finished, even though some of us here are in our 70s and 80s. You aren't permanent. You haven't finally made it to what you were destined to be. You will move forward and grow older and live in different places. You will be defined in new ways by new people. We are always getting temporary titles, senior, college graduate, the title of whatever your job might be, but none of them ever stick forever either. They are just signposts letting people know where you have been wandering in the desert until they met you. There is something beautiful about being in constant change. It means that we never have to give up on ourselves. If we were ever finally finished, we might end up at a point where we were bitterly disappointed with how we came out. But out here in the wilderness, we stumble and we hurt ourselves, and we sometimes feel really lost, but at least we're never finished. Since we don't have any choice but to keep moving, we can always have hope that we will get found and that whatever bruises we have will heal. Even when we are old, the same thing is true. Nothing that we have done defines us, no failure, no loss, no hardship that we've endured. God created our life so that we are always in transition. We are desert wanderers, and therefore we can always believe that perhaps tomorrow, in our future sometime, when we have traveled just a bit further, that we will somehow be doing better. And that idea that tomorrow might be a better day on the worst day of your life is something that we all have the privilege to believe. This is not all there is. I know stuff will change, and I know that I can do better than I have before, and that thought has often rescued me. My mom used to say at the end of really bad days, and we had a lot of them, "Well, Stephen, maybe tomorrow will be a better day," by which she foolishly hoped I would be a better Stephen, but I learned just to think that the day might magically become better. That's the kind of stuff that someone who has traveled in the desert and endured lots of storms only to see the aftermath of the storm be actually beautiful and calm learns to say. And my mom had her share of storms. It works the other way too. When we do very well and we are proud of ourselves and finally stand atop whatever mountain we've been climbing, it is fleeting. The success does not and cannot stay. You can't stop the journey just because you are at a good spot in it. You're going to have to move on and know that you will fall again and hurt again and succeed again until, like the children of Israel and Jesus himself, you come to the end of the wilderness and you see in front of you the destination that you were always actually working towards, even if you were unaware that that's what you were working toward. The Bible calls it the Promised Land. For Jesus, it was Jerusalem, and for each of us, it will be our eternal life. Heaven, the place of God. That is the place where the final summation of who you are and what you have become here in the wilderness will take place. It's interesting, isn't it, that we fight so hard against that inevitable stoppage of this tiring and hard trek through our desert? But we do. We do everything that we can to never have to arrive at the place where we have found it and we can finally rest and stop worrying about what we are becoming. When I have talked with people about the time of stopping, many of them have imagined that they will be judged by the things that they have accomplished along the way, or they will be judged in comparison to other people who got stuck in the harder parts of the wilderness. People tend to want to say that when they arrive, they'll be able to prove by their temporary and fading accomplishments that they deserve to get in and that they should be given all the good things in that place. So that the person who manages to drag the most ribbons and awards or the most money or the best physique to the finish line imagines that somehow there is for them a more permanent place, a special prize. But I don't think that it's that way. Partly because the Bible doesn't contain a lot of commands that we should acquire a bunch of stuff or that we should judge our lives by the fact that sometimes we do better than other people. That kind of thing isn't in the Bible at all. If it was, Jesus would have said stuff like that. He would have said, here are the great commandments. You should get up early in the morning and work harder than anyone else to prove that you are better than they are. God will love you more than them. He might also have added, you should guard the things you earn and don't be giving them away to a bunch of ne'er-do-wells. Instead of those things, Jesus seems to have taught that we should be about the business of being on the journey. And specifically, during the journey, we should have the good sense to know that since everyone is wandering in the same big desert, it isn't so much about arriving as it is being a good traveling companion. If those that you travel with are hungry or thirsty or exposed to the sun without proper clothing, Jesus said, you should help them so they don't die, so they can continue that trek. And if they get cranky because it is, after all, a long walk, you should remember the times when you were cranky and look past how they act on any particular day. And for goodness sake, if you are lucky enough to be riding for a while through this wilderness in a car and someone wants to roll the window down, let them. It doesn't hurt you. I got a message from a young lady who I knew in a different spot in my wilderness trek. She was a little girl in 1995, and she used to come up and sit on the stairs of the church in Julesburg when I did children's times. Like Debbie Petty, I mostly did scientific experiments. She found me on Facebook and decided to catch me up on her life. She's grown up. She's married. She has children young enough to be listening to children's stories in church, and she is now the Sunday school leader in that same little church. And I am now on the other side of the wilderness of career and ministry, and most of what I will ever probably do now lies behind. I have a life that is very different than what it was when I knew her. We knew each other when both of us knew a lot less, and both of us were a lot more innocent. And what she remembers about me is that we traveled well together. I remember that too. And I kind of think that that kind of thing is what will be waiting for us at the end of this road. I imagine that there will be a group of people that we have spent our time with on the road in the desert. They'll be on the other side already in their permanent state, and they will be recounting what it was like to journey with us for a while. If we shared and if we took care of them, that will be remembered. And if we walked by and walked past them while they were thirsty and in need, and all we did was try to find a place to hide our water and adjust our backpack full of food, I fear that they will recount those times and remember them too. It won't be a matter when we finally are done wandering of how much stuff we have at the end. It will be a matter of how much stuff we shared along the way. Since nothing except for heaven is permanent, it makes sense to share and get along as best we can. I hope that I will have the chance to either greet or be greeted by a bunch of you, because we have traveled together here in this place very nicely. There has been lots of sharing and even some pretty good storytelling and singing while we have walked through the path that goes through Visalia. We know that we will someday be done with our wandering, every one of us. So let's keep moving along together in this same way in this church, sharing and laughing and caring for one another as best we can, being good traveling companions. It's good for us. It helps the time in the wilderness go by better, and it is, in fact, when we do those things, exactly what we're supposed to be learning in the time that God gives us to wander about in this wilderness together. Someday we'll arrive at home together and recount stories of the here and now, and we should take seriously the commands of Jesus to make the here and now and the journey worth talking about. Amen.